This program is brought to you by freekeen.com.
All right, I'm standing here with Julia, who's you're a New Hampshire native, right?
Yes, I am. I grew up in Windham and went to high school in Salem.
And we've been long-term Facebook friends, and we've had plenty of debates because you're more of a
libertarian socialist, a classical anarchist, social anarchist, whatever.
I figured I should let you fill in the blank rather than trying to describe what you are. But anyway,
Predonian mutualist, I don't know, whatever.
But you had a something on your mind that you wanted to rant about.
Yeah.
And that's what I do, is let people rant.
Well, one of the things that I saw this YouTube video recently, and this video was from a couple years ago, and like this guy, it was a college student, he was making this video, and he's a little out there, but he made this really good point in this video just about how people in our society don't really ask why that often. And a lot of times, like, we're just so focused on like the what, the who, the how, the when, you know. And he said no one ever asks why. And that's the problem, because if you're trying to build a new society within the shell of the old, you know, you're trying to break down the old society and build an entirely new system, you have to ask that why. You know, that's where it starts. That's step one. And the point that he was making, and I'm kind of elaborating on it, but it's like, you know, if you're in this movement, like if you say, you know, the whole world is just horrible the way it is, you know, you have mass monopolization of resources, increasingly authoritarian governments, people having no autonomy whatsoever, you know, regardless if it's political, economic, you know, in your workforce, your boss is dictating your life, you know, the government's dictating your life, you know, you have bankers, users who are dictating your life, whatever. And, but if you want to create that new society,
Julia, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You keep moving into the dark, so can you come back into the light? Okay. I'm going to back up too. Okay, but then I want you to look your best.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. But
anyway,
the first thing you have to question is like, you know, okay, now we know that the world sucks and we want to do away with it and create something totally new. But the first thing we have to be asking is, why do we want to do that? You know, and that's what I would say as well, you know, is that that's the first step, is you have to be asking these fundamental questions. Because, you know, one of the things that I see a lot, like when I talk to free staters and when I talk to like other like libertarians, there's a few libertarians at my college, you know, and one of the things we talk about all the time is like, they talk about making a free society, but I don't really think it's just about making a society free and voluntary. I think you also have to make that society desirable. Because when you think about it, I mean, no one's going to want to fight for your free society or build your free, you know, your new free society.
But they'll fight for their Xbox.
Yeah, but I think like no one's really going to desire having a new society if it means something like standards of living are going down, or, you know, standards of living will go down, or things won't be as convenient as they once were. And, you know, it's like, I mean, it's kind of a false dichotomy because you have way more than two options, but I think it really is something that, you know, people should be thinking about more, like, you know, because I mean, like, you know, when I first heard of like the Free Staters, you know, they're coming to New Hampshire and they want to create like a libertarian paradise or whatever. I mean, half of me said, oh, this is interesting, and the other half of me said like, uh-oh, you know, it's the uncertainty, like what are they going to create, you know, if they are going to be that powerful.
Well, the thing to remember is that they don't have, I mean, they are always going to be averaged out against everybody else.
Yeah.
And all they can do is have an influence. They can't ever rule.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I know, but like one of the things that I have heard, that like I have friends who, you know, they're affiliated with the project, they're either in it or whatever, and they say that the Free State Project, and I don't know how true this is, but they say that it's actually very divided. That you have people who are like intellectuals who have like, you know, degrees from George Mason University and like they know Austrian economics off the top of their head, and those are people who are very like the intellectual types, and they're much more interested in like taking power. And then you have like the off the grid people who are just kind of like, you know, doing their own thing and whatever. And then I've also heard too that there's kind of a left and right divide, interestingly enough. Like you have like the Murray Rothbard types, like the libertarian capitalists, but then you have people who are like the Benjamin Tucker, Kevin Carson types who are like libertarian socialists, like left libertarians. I know Tucker openly called himself a socialist a few times, but
Yeah.
you know that he wrote that whole thing about state socialism versus anarchism. Whatever. But that's
There's another divide that's beginning to happen that I feel myself being part of more than any other. I'm not really a part of this divide between the civil disobedience crowd and the political crowd. I'm kind of in both crowds there, but I am part of the divide between the people who are in the government and people who are not. I find that more and more. That I'm questioning my old friends as to why did you vote that way, or how did you propose this bill with this wording in it, and there's that kind of thing. Once someone gets into power, they're automatically going to be a little bit divided from.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, one of my favorite anarchist texts is Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's General Idea of the Revolution, and in that, I think it's chapter 4, I'm not sure, but he says some stuff in there that's very relevant to today. And I think he was writing this when he was in prison in 1850, I'm not sure, but he talks about how, a lot of times people try to reform the state, they try to reform the government, and they go along with this assumption where, it's not the institution that's bad, it's just the abuse of it. It's not the institution that's bad, it's just the people running it. And he's like, yeah, that's just like saying it's not the monarchy that's bad, it's just the king's ministers, And, because he was making that whole case for, dissolving the state and replacing it with like voluntary worker federations, worker cooperatives, all that good stuff. But I just think like that's really kind of how it is, that people, they go into it because they think like, yeah, we can really reform the system, we can make it more free. And then the first thing that happens is it always, that they get all messed up as soon as they take power, and the system doesn't change. It changes form, but it doesn't. The violent monopoly is still there. The authority is still there. The hierarchy is still there. So.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that you wish people would ask why more often, and you probably have asked the question why. And what's your answer?
Well, why? Well, what I think about is well, the world is horrible. But why? Why is the world so horrible? Well, you see mass inequalities of power. You see things like, the majority of the population feels like they have no say. They're being dictated to constantly. And why, and just like I said, that these hierarchical institutions, when you take power, people go bad, and I asked myself this question a couple of years ago when I did become an anarchist, before I was kind of like a social democrat type, like I hung out with very authoritarian Marxist groups, I'm sorry to say, but I just kept, and at the time I was actually studying international relations, and one of the patterns that I kept seeing was how, why is it that every time this new state forms, becomes independent, whatever, why does it always go bad so quickly? And that was just the thing I was thinking about, like, why do you see this pattern again and again? Like, why is it? And people just want to blame, like, oh, it's bad leaders, he didn't do what he should have done. But then when I started working at this anarchist bookstore in Boston, and I started reading all these texts, and people were saying this stuff, 150 years ago, and it was just like, and they just said, yeah, it's not the people. You look at it as you look at everything from the institutional perspective. You don't really care about who's on top of the hierarchy. You examine the hierarchy.
Yeah. So the problem you're saying, the world is messy because of a systemic issue.
Yes,
yeah.
Because you just
systemic.
And you just see
every single part of the world is ruled by a government that follows a similar model in many ways.
And I think like that's the big problem too, is that when you have a hierarchical social structure, and you have those inequalities of power, people don't really have as much control over themselves as they wish. People don't really, they're not able to, basically they're just not able to live as they want to, and it destroys our autonomy.
Right.
And I just, I think it's bad on all ends. It's like the people you said that they take power and then they vote for really crappy laws, and you're just wondering, why would you do that? And it's like, who knows?
Well, I can't believe, Julia, we got through 10 minutes of conversation without it being an argument.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so you want to...
It wasn't even a debate.
You just want to ask me, like...
But that's all right. I'm impressed with myself.
Okay.
or with you, too.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thanks, Julia.
All right, but you should ask me the win-win question.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, we couldn't come up with two sides to talk about.
Well,
could we?
I guess, I'll just say that, what I would propose if, I was going to talk to like other free staters and stuff and just say, you know, because a lot of them come from a completely different viewpoint, I would say that if we were going to decide on like a win-win scenario, I would look at the dual power strategy, and I would say, you know, we should be building those alternative institutions before we start privatizing the schools, before we start privatizing the post office. We should be building alternative schools. We should be building alternative institutions that are horizontally organized, like worker cooperatives, where, you know, people have say over decisions that affect them, you know, and people are cooperating. They're not, you know, dictating to each other, you know. But I would also say as well too, like in the short term, is that if you are going to take power and you are going to try and like chip away at the size of the government, I would say that the first things you should be targeting are those 4 deadly monopolies that we talk about. You know, you should be trying to do things like get rid of land monopolies, get rid of money monopolies, which is pretty hard to do since the Fed.
You mean like the Federal Reserve
note, all that.
I see.
Get rid of patent monopolies, because those, you know, those are terrible if you look at what they do. Like, I mean, drug patents are one of the reasons healthcare is so expensive. For
yeah.
Everything. And get rid of these like tariff monopolies that are an infringement on a freedom of movement. And I would say like that's one thing that I'm certain that, you know, libertarian socialists and libertarian capitalists could probably agree on as well. But I would just say like what we really should be doing, like first of all, is showing solidarity with other people, like showing solidarity with our neighbors, and, you know, just trying to do that, like build those alternatives. You know, just don't even focus on what the government's doing. Just like do what needs to be done. And I think that's the solution.
Interesting. So, I like a lot of these ideas.
Yeah.
Well, we should talk again.
All right. Yeah. Sure.
All right. Thanks, Julia. Merry Christmas.
Yeah. You too. Happy holidays. Happy solstice.
Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah.